Welcome everybody to this webinar on the question, how can SME resilience and adaptivity be strengthened through business continuity management in light of COVID-19? Welcome to the online event. My name is Jana Post. I work for the German development agency GIZ and moderating today's session. I hope you're all well, and just for your information in the beginning, this session will be recorded, so please be aware of that. The recording will be made available after the session, and please, throughout the input and panel discussion, please write down your questions for yourself, and you will be able to post them later in the chat, and we will pick them up for the Q&A session. So please, just hold on to your questions. I would like to now hand over for some welcoming words to Mr. Escipion Oliveira, who is the Assistant Secretary General at the Organization of African, Caribbean and Pacific States. So thank you, Escipion, if you would like to take over for some welcoming words. And I think we can't hear you currently, Escipion, if you could. No, still not. Or is it me?
There you go. Yeah, thanks. I think that we were muting or unmuting each other. Anyway, thank you very much. The OACPS is very happy and proud to be associated with this initiative. We're very also happy and proud of being associated with the Investment Climate Reform Facility, which is managed by the German Corporation, a long-standing friend of the OACPS, the British Council, Expertise France, and CMV. The European Union is also a long-standing partner of the OACPS, and whom we thank a lot for the possibility of having this program. The OACPS Secretariat is working towards being fit for purpose, as has been instructed by the Secretary General, His Excellency, Mr. George Revelo Pinto Chicote. So this particular seminar is of importance to us because it's really being or adapting ourselves to the new realities. I think that we are sure that the COVID pandemic has shown us that no country, continent, sector, or region alone will be able to ride successfully this pandemic. And this webinar will really show us ways of finding better solutions. Like they say, failing to prepare is preparing to fail. So I'm really looking at what the experts are going to be bringing today to us. We at the OACPS countries from the Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific, we are true innovators and day to day have to face situations that challenge us. So we are very much accustomed of innovating, preparing, etc., but we seldom write it down in a strategic way. So I hope that this webinar today would allow us to put some of those ideas that we practice every day in a structured way that would allow us in future occasions, hopefully very, very, very far away from this year, maybe for my grandchildren so that they can read it, so we don't pass like something again in their lifetime. But well, I just wanted to express congratulations to the team, GIC, GIZ, British Council, Expertise France, and SMV. And I'll be here listening with much attention to the panelists. You have a very dedicated group of panelists, young persons. So I'm really interested in this type of activity. Like I always say, if you haven't taken a shower with a little tin can, you are not from my country. So all of us have been able to do with what we have, but this seminar will help us a lot. Thank you very much for your patience with me, and good work for all the panelists.
Thank you very much, Escipion Oliveira. We would have handed over to the representative from the European Commission, who unfortunately cannot join today. but instead I would move on and I would like to introduce today's speakers. So that is firstly Mr. Daniel Birungi. He's a private sector development practitioner with 12 years experience in private sector development roles. He is presently the executive director of the Uganda Manufacturers Association, the UMA. And the UMA is an industry body that brings together over 1,300 manufacturers in Uganda and has a mandate to promote and protect the interests of industrialists and manufacturers in Uganda. Daniel holds a bachelor degree of information technology from Makerere University in Kampala, Uganda, and a master's degree in management and information systems from the University of Manchester in England. So welcome, Daniel, to this panel. Great to have you here. And then also, secondly, a warm welcome to Vanessa Phala. She is a national of South Africa, recently joined the International Labour Organization as a senior specialist for employers' activity at the ILO Decent Work team and Office for the Caribbean. Prior to joining ILO, Vanessa was an executive director for social and transformational policy at Business Unity South Africa. And Vanessa has graduated from University of Witwatersrand in 2004, where she obtained a master's degree in international relations. Welcome, Vanessa. Thank you for being here. And then Gary Rynhart, who has worked with and in the UN system for nearly 20 years now and is currently working as a senior specialist employers activities for ILO in the East African region. He has developed and ran programs to support the private sector in social risk assessment, mitigation and management across Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. And Gary is co-chair of the ILO GIZ Development Group on Private Sector Development in Fragile States. Welcome, Gary. And Julian Schweitzer is an international consultant specialized in private sector development and labor markets in context of fragility and forced displacement. He has delivered advisory service to UNHCR, INGOs, governments, business, and civil society in over 25 countries. And Julian holds a master degree in applied labor economics from Sciences Po at Paris and bachelor in conflict analysis from the University of Bradford. Welcome, Julian, who will also be, we will be hearing from a lot throughout this webinar. And last but not least, Stefanie, who is project manager of the ICR Facility, which is organizing this online event jointly with ILO. And thank you all for sharing your experience regarding business continuity management today with us in this online event. I will be handing over to Julian now, who has some questions to the audience.
Excellent, thank you, Jana. I should be in control of the screen right now. Let me just check it. Yes, okay. Well, sorry, okay. So there you go. We had a lovely introduction of ourselves. Thank you very much, Jana. But we are, of course, also keen to get to know our participants, at least a little bit. And so we have two questions for you. And the first one has just popped up on the screen. Can you please vote and just quickly let us know your professional background? You have 5 options. First one is private sector, so EBMO or business owner, public sector, international organization, which we got 2 times. Just go for the first one. So option 3, and then academia would be the 4th one. So that's the first question. If you can just quickly vote. And then once we have done that, we should move on to the second question or see the results. Where are you based exactly? So to have a bit of a geographical overview, either in Europe, the Americas and the Caribbean, or Africa, Middle East, Asia and Pacific. Okay. So can we share the results on the screen? Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so majority is coming from international organizations, 62%. Got a quite good share of private sector as well, 23%, and then a few colleagues from the public sector. Great to see, good mix. Welcome everybody. And if we can quickly look at the geographical spread. Okay, and that is actually quite balanced. So Europe is dominating a bit, but equal share of Americas, Caribbean, Africa. Then we've got about 14% from the Middle East and 7% Asia and Pacific, although time zone is of course a bit difficult for you guys over there. So thanks for making time and joining us. Great to see. Okay, I think that was it from me for this second. And Jana, back to you with the agenda.
Yes, because before we start, I will just quickly walk you through the agenda. We will have welcoming words from Stefanie soon. We will then have an introduction to the cooperation between GIZ and ILO on business continuity management training and a general overview, kind of setting the scene from Gary Rynhart. We will then hear from Julian Schweitzer on our topic, basically, how can SME resilience and adaptivity be strengthened through business continuity management in light of COVID-19. And we will then have some reflections from our panelists, Daniel Birungi and Vanessa Phala, on their experiences in their country context. And we will then have a Q&A session and then a closing from Stefanie again. Yeah, so over to you, Stefanie. Oh, actually, no, sorry. There's objectives following.
Yeah, sorry. We've made this very dynamic. We're going back and forth. So we just saw the agenda. We have the 6 points. And, you know, why are we doing this? Obviously, there are 3 objectives that you would like to bring to you today. One is quickly define together business continuity. I'm then going to quickly introduce BCM, as Jana said. And then above all, we really want to highlight and shine the role of EBMOs in building business resilience, both at the macro level and the micro level. And this is why it's so exciting to have Daniel and Vanessa here with us today. Okay, thanks. Now it's to Stefanie. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Welcome to everyone for joining our webinar today. Today is actually the last session in a whole series of webinars which the ICR Facility has organized throughout the summer in relation to COVID-19 to try and support organizations, stakeholders from all across the ACP in adjusting to the new reality of COVID-19 when it comes to topics of investment climate and business environment reform. And yeah, we are glad to come to an end with this series. It was a lot of work, but we're also looking forward to the next activities which we are planning. The facility actually was kicked off at the end of 2019, and we have just finalized our inception phase and are now really ready to deliver support. It's jointly financed by the EU, the OACPS, the German government and British Council. And as it was already mentioned, it's also implemented by 4 different agencies, the GIZ, British Council, Activities France, and SME. And it's a facility which supports businesses, not businesses, public and private stakeholders. So actually not individual businesses, but organized private sector in Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific countries when they are conducting public-private dialogues, when they want to implement business environment reforms, whatever they want to do to improve the investment climate for businesses in their country or region, because we are also always very happy to work with regional entities and bodies across the ACP world. The main field of work we have is actually providing demand-based support, which can be technical assistance only, so we don't provide funds, but we are providing trainings, we can do analysis, we can support you with facilitation of strategy processes and so on. Just to give a few examples, we are I think this week we started supporting the Ministry of Labor in Ghana in implementing a green job strategy. We will be supporting an eco-industrial park in improving its framework conditions for more environmentally friendly businesses. But we are also supporting business membership organizations in their strategies and in improving their work with the private sector. So it's a wide spectrum, and we would be happy to hear from you. I will say something about this after the end of the webinar as well, but basically there's two ways for receiving support from our side. Either if it's very specifically support on business continuity management, then we are very happy to give you the opportunity to work directly with Julian afterwards for a certain amount of days or hours to just answer your immediate questions. I'll come back to that later. But also you can send us full-on requests, which have a bit of a longer approval process, but will then be able, through these, we will be able to support you with a maximum of 90 days in case your request is found eligible and implementable through the facility. If you want to find the opportunity for actually sending us requests and working with us, then please get in touch through either an email address, which should be popping up somewhere, icrfacility@giz.de, or as of hopefully next week, fingers crossed, also through our website, icr-facility.eu. We'll post it in the chat as well so that you can find it. For now, it's not live yet, but as of next week, hopefully you will find information about our support there. And you will also there find information about the next series of webinars, which we will be running and will be focused on climate smart investments, social enterprise and financing of small and medium enterprises, as well as tools for business environment reform. We will be running these webinars every second week. So if you're interested to follow them, please check out our website once it's online. So much from my side. Thank you very much. Looking forward to this webinar.
Great. Thank you, Stefanie. Okay, I'm now going to hand the floor to Gary, who is going to set the scene for us very quickly and tell us a little bit about the cooperation between GIZ and ILO on business continuity and why BCM is so important, especially in these days.
Thanks, Julian. There's a slide coming up, isn't there? There's two slides. Yeah. So good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody. And first of all, to thank the organisers for what I think is a very timely webinar of high interest. So I've been, as Julian said, I've been tasked with giving some context to the webinar this morning. I'm setting the scene. And to do that, I'm going to do three things. I'm going to firstly talk about what is business continuity management. I mean, a little bit in terms of a definition. Secondly, current areas of risk for firms. And then lastly, we're going to look at this in terms of why it's such a pertinent issue for SMEs. So maybe the first thing to do in the webinar is to look at definitions and in terms of what is risk, what is resilience, and what is BCM. I'm going to refer to the acronym BCM throughout, business continuity management, rather than business continuity planning. So if we're looking for a definition, I found the following, which was pretty good, I think. Sums up BCM. Your ability as a business to predict the next crisis is impossible, but your ability to prepare for it is not. So what that means in practice is, identifying risks in your business and putting in place mitigation measures to try and reduce that risk. So in essence, what that means at a personal level for a business owner is looking at the business, how it operates, what its main stakeholders are, where its main markets are, and then identifying risks in each of those different kind of categories, and then doing something about and putting in place measures to reduce that risk. So fundamentally, BCM is about risk reduction, identification of risk and risk reduction. Again, it's not an insurance policy. Sometimes a crisis is too big, and no matter what plans you have in place, your business unfortunately will not be able to deal with them. But without those plans in place, what is certain, you'll be badly prepared. So at its simplest, I look at it as an insurance policy. It's an insurance policy. So in terms of its relevance within the UN system, in the last number of years, there's been a lot of discourse around building a resilience culture. And as the Secretary General, I think the quote is there on the PowerPoint, it says we're spending far too much money in terms of dealing with the aftermath of a crisis rather than the prevention of those crises. So that's very much so something that he's built into his current reform plans, which are very, very strongly through, and as I said, the catchphrase he's using is building a culture of resilience. So very much so prescient approach, considering what has happened in 2020 and considering that COVID-19 has utterly upended our world. So from an ILO and GIZ perspective, we've been working on this for the last number of years, and we felt there was a lacuna, slight gap in the resilience marketplace, to put it like that, in that there's a lot of effort and a lot of work going into supporting particularly small firms around resilience against natural hazards, flooding, earthquakes, weather systems. Less so in terms of other areas, and in particular we worked closely on building resilience for firms in fragile situations, in situations of political or actual conflict. And this work this has been building in the last number of years, and then what we've been doing this year is very much so trying to look at building resilience in terms of multi-hazard across a whole range of different issues. So we'll hear a little bit later from the panelists in terms of that work, but it's very much so our current focus, multi-hazard resilience. So second point, just in terms of the context, is to look at where the main risks are. So I'd see 6 broad categories of risk. First risk, the immediate risk right now is the health risk. That means workers getting sick, their families getting sick. This is a disruption in terms of absenteeism, which can affect, running a business, impact on supply chains. Other firms having similar problems also impacting on your business. Health infrastructure, starting to manage demand in certain countries. And then lastly, compliance with new health measures. So they're all the 3 kind of areas around health. Second area of risk is economics. Again, as economics markets have severely downturned, recession's taking hold. This is a major area, obviously. The third area is political risk, and we've given governments, vast powers to arrange, to put in place, freedom of movement, company closures, closure of ports, closure of borders. So states of emergency come with, sweeping powers for the executive, and this is not without a risk. So that's the third risk. The fourth risk is infrastructure. Currently, firms are highly reliant, particularly on ICT and broadband infrastructure. So under the current circumstances, even a short network outage can have a really serious impact for a business with so many staff members working online and dealing with moving a lot of the business over to an online function. So that's a major risk. Access to physical infrastructure as well, closure of ports, roads, all of these kinds of things, restrictions on mobility can impact in terms of the infrastructure risk. Fifth area of risk is social risk. Again, with falling economic activity, rising unemployment, social risk is a very significant risk. Unrest and crime may increase as people grow increasingly desperate. In addition, COVID-19 has brought pretty much all migration to a halt. So companies that are reliant on migrant workers will struggle, but countries that are reliant on remittances from migrants again will also struggle. So two elements to the migration bit. And lastly, environmental, in that all of the natural hazards that you can face as a firm, they're all still in play. They haven't gone away. So 6 areas of risk. Now, your risk area will differ depending on the sector you're in. So manufacturing, things like textiles, food and beverage processing, other consumer goods, high area of risk in this particular sector. Often a dependence on imports and exports, dependence on the infrastructure. Manufacturing also tends to have a larger workforce, and also in the current situation, higher degree of proximity in working places. So there's a greater risk there, and we've seen that in a number of different sectors manufacturing sectors over the last number of years, where they've become hotspots for the virus. And in addition, disruption to kind of key public utilities such as electricity and water, again, can have a very, very high impact on manufacturing. Agricultural sector, less so in terms of the risk. Health and transmission risk may be lower, and currently, market demand has been quite high. But supply chain disruption, and as I just mentioned, in terms of migrant workers, those companies that are reliant on migrant workers can have a risk there. The agriculture, oil and gas, forestry, mining, these kinds of sectors are often located away from densely populated areas. So again, risk can be located a little bit quicker and often kind of localized. Less so in something like the services sector. Greater requirement to have access to cities and large labor forces, and obviously sectors like retail, hospitality, tourism, with a high degree of face-to-face contact, have been very, very badly affected, and continue to do so. Last issue, just to wrap up these kind of these introductory remarks, is to turn to the issue of SMEs, and there can be a perception that BCM, business continuity management, and risk audits and all of these different things are things that are just for larger firms, and that is very much so not the case. BCM is something that any firm, no matter what your size is, should be doing. And I thought I'd finish up by just giving you a short example of exactly what you can do as a small firm. When we were developing some tools a number of years ago, we were doing a training with a number of very, very small enterprises. And we had one enterprise. She was a farmer, and she made products from bees and beeswax, honey, and different types of body creams. So she had 20 beehives, and that was her main means of production. Previously, there had been a really bad weather system in that area and had done a lot of damage to local firms. But she was actually quite fortunate in that she was at the bottom of a valley and had, managed to have no damage at all to her farm or to her means of production. But she was extremely lucky because there could well have been a landslide, and that would have wiped out all of her beehives. They're all located at this bottom. So during the course of this training, we asked her to identify her primary risk. So her primary risk was to her means of production, her 20 beehives. So what she could do, by moving half of them to just a different location within that farm, she's halved her risk overnight. The second thing she could do was her product, honey, fortunately was non-perishable. So a very, very big advantage. But again, she had it all in the one location. So again, by moving 50% of, or approximately 50% of her honey to her brother's place in town, she'd again halved her risk. So two fairly simple actions, neither of them costly or complicated, halved her risk for a very, very small enterprise. So that for me kind of sums up BCM in a nutshell. It's something that every firm should be doing, even just to start thinking about it, identifying where your big risks are, and then putting in place often quite a straightforward measure to reduce it. Julian, I'll leave it there at this point. Thank you.
Super, Gary. Thanks for kicking us off. Okay, let us then dive right into the content. Okay, great. I'm in charge of the screen. And let's unpack BCM for SMEs a little bit more. And before we start to go into the content, I actually quickly wanted to hand the floor back to you guys and test a bit the level of expertise here in the room. So we've got a few options for you. I would like to know, how familiar are you with business continuity management? Not at all, so really just a beginner. You've done some reading, a little bit, quite familiar, you've done a training, or you're an expert, you actually have applied business continuity in your firm or in other contexts. Okay, great. And here we have the results. So most of you are beginners, that's great. That's why we're here. Bit of pre-existing knowledge, and then we have a few experts. Super. Okay. Next thing then, and Gary already gave some hints, but still I just wanted to do that exercise with you. Our experts, the ones who just voted for having advanced knowledge on the topics. In your own words, how would you define business continuity? Can you just quickly type up some ideas in your chat box and give us some ideas from your end, please? And then Jana, I think you're able to see what the participants are sharing, and if you could just read out 2 to 3 definitions that catch your attention. If any.
Not yet. I'm still
Not yet.
waiting. So don't be shy. There must be some good ideas.
You can also quickly Google and just copy and paste if you're really out of ideas.
Or take what Gary said.
Exactly.
No, nothing yet. Ah, now there's something coming in.
Okay.
Always having stable business activities.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Good one.
People
Okay.
are shy.
Then we leave it at stable business activities. That's also good enough for the next. So let us look at the details. Gary gave us one definition. I've got another 2 for you here. The first one is developed by the Institute for Business Continuity, and it defines business continuity as the capability of an organization to continue delivery of products or services at acceptable predefined levels following a disruptive incident. In other words, it requires you to understand at what level can I sustain my business operations after an incident has happened, and you would need to do that exercise, of course, before the incident happened to know that. The ILO developed a slightly different one in 2011, keeping key business activities ongoing after an adverse event with the human, material, and financial resources available at the time. So it highlights that your enterprise consists of more than just your financial flows. Of course, there's a material element to it, and of course the human element. I think that is what we have seen specifically now in the coronavirus pandemic, that the human element and managing that appropriately is one of the key factors. Both definitions are a bit long, a bit abstract, so what I wanted to give you today is, in a nutshell, business continuity is keeping things going when things go wrong. And we'll try to see how that works in practice. Now, what is then business continuity management? So we have defined business continuity. What's the management aspect of that? And above all, it's a process that you have to manage that really wants to counteract the negative impacts of the threats on the continuity of your business activities. So in other words, it's this preparing aspect. And you can do so by strengthening your business resilience through doing basically 2 things. You can work on risk preventive measures, and you can work on preparedness arrangements. And these are then going to enable you to undertake various response options once a crisis hits, that are going to safeguard the interests of the key stakeholders. It's going to save your reputation, hopefully, and your brand and the value-creating activities that your enterprise entails. And just to visualize this and to make it a bit easy again, if we would have an equation, it would be the following. Business continuity consists of preventive measures plus preparedness arrangements plus response options. The first 2, that's the things that you do before the crisis, and the last one is what you then do during the crisis, right? And if we go back to the example that Gary has just given us about, the entrepreneur and the beehives. So the preventive measure would be that you relocate your stocks, your raw material, your finished products to a different location, in case you know that you are living in a hazard-prone and flood-prone area, for example. A very simple example for preparedness arrangements could be having a list of alternative suppliers. So if you know that your business might be cut off by floods from the rest of the country for a certain number of days, you would want to have alternative suppliers that you can ring up to get your inputs and a response option would then to actually use that list and to make sure that you can continue the business. So this was just really a very simple way of illustrating the different components of business continuity management. And to dig a bit further and to now focus specifically on the coronavirus risk scenario, I'm going to introduce Josie to you, who is a small entrepreneur in East Africa, and I think she has a sardine business, which is going to watch a 3-minute video and understand the different steps of business continuity management. Great, thank you to Suk, who is in the background and managing the software for us and switching the windows. Great, so back at the presentation. So what I want to do now in just a few minutes, because I'm conscious that we're a bit short on time already, just quickly wanted to unpack a bit the different steps that Josie took and illustrate them and highlight them here for you. So it's 6 steps. As we have seen, the first one is really to identify the key products or services that drive your business. So what are the most important products or services that you deliver? What contributes to the bulk of the income? How many clients are buying what product or requesting what kind of service? And most importantly, what could be the cost of non-delivery? And here it's essential that we don't think exclusively in financial terms, but also in terms of reputational risk. So if there's a product that you can't produce or deliver to a critical customer for a certain period of time, are you at risk of losing this one very important customer, for example? So that's the reputational element, right? Second step is then to establish the overall objective of your BCP. And according to your enterprise, the sector you work in, the size of your enterprise, these things might be differently. But generally speaking, it's usually 4 elements that you would look at. It's about protecting people, their health and safety, and that is especially important in the corona crisis, of course. It's about supporting processes through supply chain management and logistics, obviously about sustaining profits through managing risks, and about managing partnerships by identifying the key stakeholders that your enterprise relies upon and the different risk scenarios that you're facing. Steps 3 and 4 then entail the evaluation of the potential impact of disruptions to your enterprise and your workers. So you really want to understand where are the threats to your business and what kind of factors are driving them, which ones of those are within your control and which ones of those are outside of your control. How long could interruptions last? How long might you be without electricity, without internet, without cash flow, or not able to produce because your workers have to stay at home due to a lockdown or similar things? And then, what happens to your suppliers, your partners, your contractors, those that you really need to keep your key business operations alive. And then step 4 goes back to what we call the 4Ps framework. So once you have identified the possible impact of disruptions, you want to come up with a list of the possible actions that you can take to protect your business. And again, these would be people, processes, profits, and partnerships. So you always want to think alongside these 4 dimensions. And then step 5 and 6, pretty straightforward. The best BCP plan won't work unless you don't communicate it well. So once you have done that action list, it's essential that you really inform everybody. And this is easier said than being done. A good communication strategy is really at the heart of any BCM measure that you're taking. And it's very straightforward, knowing your key stakeholders and finding the appropriate communication channel so that everybody gets the message and knows what you're doing. That is really critical to success. And at the end, BCP is not a one-off process. It's really a continuous process, and that's why it's important that you make the BCP really a living document. So you want to go back fairly regular to your BCP and update it, check that the overall objective is still relevant, update your risk assessment, and really look at the context, right? And we've seen that things can go bad really quickly. So if you were based in, let's say, Beirut, you were struggling with a lingering socioeconomic crisis, you had Corona, you had the blast all of a sudden. So risk scenarios can change drastically. Same goes for the Caribbean. Our colleagues there, you have Corona, you had tropical storms. El Salvador was just hit by 2 in May and June. So you really need to be aware of what is out there, right? So it's about making it a living document. And this was actually my next slide. It's really saying, I think the key point here is going from focusing on COVID, focusing on a single risk scenario to a multi-hazard scenario, and being aware of all the critical risks and threats that your business can face that are out there. So it's really the combination that can make life very difficult for you and your business. So the kind of tools that we're using should focus on a multi-hazard risk scenario. And I think by looking at the 6 steps that I very quickly outlined, they're quite general. So they're not just COVID specific, but they will also apply to other types of threats. And then lastly, the other important component that you need to consider is really the scale of impact that you need to prepare for, right? It's one thing to have a BCP in plan, the other is to imagine how big you need to plan. Is it the size of a computer? Are you a very localized business that is only operating in one area without a lot of connections, suppliers, customers from other areas of the country? Or do you really need to think about, a risk that would affect the entire city, the entire country, or indeed the entire world? And crucially, that really depends on 2 things. One, the depth of your business operations. So how much do you penetrate export markets? How much do you rely on import markets? How complex are your business operations? And then lastly, your ability essentially to anticipate the complexity of the hazard that you're facing. And I think that is actually one of the most critical things and something that Corona has taught us. And just to finish on a personal anecdote, back in March, my wife and I thought it was a good idea to travel to 2 different continents at once, and we ended up being separated for 2 months. And that was simply because although we saw that Corona was spreading from, China to Germany, which is from where we traveled, we could simply not imagine that within 2 weeks, global travel would stop and things would get so incredibly complicated, right? It was beyond our belief. So I think the degree to which our world is connected, businesses are connected, supply chains are connected, is just so complex, and really need to be very creative when we do our risk assessments and the way in which we prepare for them. So just a few key takeaways before we go into discussion. BCM, as I said before, consists of 3 things: prevention, preparedness, and response options. It's a continuous process that you should do recurrently. It consists of 6 very simple steps that I just illustrated before. It's a bit of a hassle, but it's also important to realize that BCM is an opportunity to analyze and improve your business model. And that is really the incentive, I think, for SMEs here to do these kinds of analysis, because an enterprise with BCM measures in place essentially is attractive to clients, partners, and investors, right? Because they know you're prepared, you're going to sustain, and you're going to weather the crises that might hit you. And then, as I said before, it's a complex, interconnected world, so it's essential to think beyond single risk scenarios, beyond COVID-19, towards multi-risk scenarios. That's it from my end. Just very quick inputs to put us on the same page in terms of different steps of BCM, what it is. And now I have the pleasure to go to our discussion. And I'm excited that we have Daniel and Vanessa with us today. So thanks again to both of you for making time. And let us start right away. Daniel, I've just gone sort of through the drive theory. We have seen the video, but it was still a bit abstract. So I was wondering if you could help me to go from theory to practice. You're working for the UMA in Uganda. You have 1,300 members in your organization. Can you tell us a little bit about how many of your members had invested into BCM measures before Corona? And what were then some of the gaps that you identified? What kind of support services did the UMA provide to the members that were unprepared? What was the state of affairs a few months ago?
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you for the elaboration on BCM. I think there is always a lot more new things to learn. Now, to understand the level of preparedness of our members, you have to understand the breadth of our membership, that it really runs the gamut from the small players, the micro players actually, all the way to the corporates. We noticed a difference in preparation depending on where on the continuum they sat. The smaller players may not have been that well prepared, because in any case, their daily struggle is to ensure survival. And it's a bit difficult when you're focusing on the next day's take to focus 3 months, a year from now. You really focused on today. So for those, the level of preparedness was a bit lacking. For the bigger players, it was certainly a lot better. Although all across the board, one thing we noticed when we did our reviews is that while there was preparation for a number of different scenarios, the pandemic kind of got everyone unawares, because as a country, we've never had to grapple with a pandemic that slows down everything. We've had to deal with political risk, we've had to deal with flooding, we've had to deal with a couple of the what now in hindsight look like run-of-the-mill catastrophes, but the pandemic was different, because in the beginning, a lot of the thinking was, yeah, it's in China, we don't have to worry much about it, it will not get to us. And then it came to thinking that, okay, it's now beginning to affect us because most of our supplies in terms of raw materials and supply chains are linked to China. So there's that critical issue. And then now, as it's spread across the world, even the alternatives that could have been put in place to say, if I can't source from China or source from Brazil, those were now unavailable because lockdown was everywhere. Now we had to think, what do we do next? So what did we do to assist? we really tailored our approach to the sizing of our members. The first step was to carry out a survey on where everyone was on the continuum, understand what level of preparedness they had, and therefore what were the pain points that we needed to address. We then went ahead to develop trainings for our members. Some of them are focusing on the health side of things to say, fine, one of the biggest risks you have is the health risks, because like someone mentioned earlier, in manufacturing, it's nearly impossible to do social distancing, because on the factory floor, there's a lot of community, there's a lot of communal action. And as such, our focus was, how do you protect your staff to ensure that they are then able to move on? The other bit was also the economic risk, because we started anticipating the fact that there would be a lockdown, and as such, markets for our products would slow down because the people who are targeting would be at home and unable to access these products. As you would know, in this side of the world, there is a bit of less developed online shopping opportunities. Most of it is shop-based, physical-based, and so that was a clear issue for us to deal with. We tried to prepare them for this, and then the other bit we did was also to work with them and the government to address and mitigate the issues around, for example, inability to access your factory. One of the things we did around that was to then ensure there were special movement permits issued to our members, so they could then, in spite of the lockdown, move between their premises and their factory premises, access their factories. The other bit was also to seek for special dispensation that then allowed our members to encamp their staff within the factory premises, because that was an option. So get your staff, put them at the factory premises, so you're not exposing them to the travel between your factory and their homes, and as such, you're still able to carry on production. Was it easy? Not at all, but along the way, we learned to work with what we had.
Super, thank you, Daniel. So you've just given us a few two examples of what you worked with government and the regulatory authorities. Do you have another one? So I'm wondering, you know, I mean, BCM, you can apply very concretely at the firm level, but certainly there are just things that are so much bigger than what you can do as, you know, a business association or your members. So was there perhaps a key policy advocacy issue and need that you identified where you said, okay, we really need your support with this, where you need, you know, that kind of policy to make sure our businesses stay in business?
Yes, one of the first things that we found out was that a lot of our members were going to struggle with cash flows, because that was when we did our survey, about 50% indicated that they had had a 75% drop in their cash flows over the course of the period. So that was the first thing we focused on, to say, okay, if the issue is cash flows, what can we as a business membership organization do to assist our members? Number one was we used our links to government to then look at the cost centers that these companies were facing. Number one was the issue of taxes and statutory dues, that is social security and taxes. And on this, we sought a deferral of payment for a period of 6 months. That was March, so 6 months up to September. That would then allow the cash flows that could have gone to this to be diverted elsewhere to allow the factories to go on. Fortunately, this was granted. The second one was we also sought an understanding with these companies and an engagement with them on the labor law aspects, to say, fine, there could be a challenge that at the moment, given the circumstances, you are unable to effectively support your entire staffing structure. You need to have discussions with them on the possibility of following for a little bit, if that's what is going to help the factory move through this process. Fortunately, many of them took this up and they were able to move it forward. The other bit was on utilities. As you know, manufacturing, at least in this neck of the woods, is largely energy intensive. So there was the issue of energy costs, which had to be dealt with. We also managed to get a deferral on payment of energy costs, payment of water costs. That also then meant that a bit more money was coming in. Now, on the other side of that was also the issue of those who had been able to supply to government, for example, but were awaiting receipt of their payments. One of our key concerns then was to engage with government to see how we could get these payments coming through a lot faster, so that we didn't have arrears tied up, both in terms of supply payment arrears, as well as tax credit arrears. We wanted those to be released as fast as possible. And then finally, of course, was the issue of the fact that our financial year as a country runs from June to June. As such, there was the issue of filing of returns and attendant payment of dues that arise out of that. So that was also an engagement we had to determine how we could then reduce the pain that was being faced by these industries. Now, since then, a lot of the engagement has been around extending some of these measures, because we've noted that while our anticipation was we could go through this over a period of maybe 3 months or 4 months, this is ongoing. Some countries are going back into lockdowns, and as such, we're finding ourselves having to go back to say, okay, initially we had asked for 6 months. Could we push this a bit further, maybe by another 3 months? Initially, perhaps you had suggested that there were some new tax measures that were due to come in. Could we defer those to a later period? Because our aim is, can we get our members to survive this period so that at the end of it all, they are able to come back stronger?
Thanks, Daniel. That sounds like a pretty comprehensive package you've put together there, and great to see that the government was responsive on many of these issues. Vanessa, I quickly wanted to pick your brain then. So you're working with the ILO in the Caribbean, you are senior specialist for employers affairs, and your job is really to support EBMOs in the Caribbean to provide high quality services to their members and to become that strong voice of the business. Looking then back at the past months and also the examples that Daniel has given us, what do you think is the role for EBMOs, or what kind of role can they play, should they play, to promote business resilience, both sort of at the micro level with the members and then at the macro level with government?
Thank you so much, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm also happy to see some of my colleagues from the Caribbean region present with us here today. And I'm also honored to be part of this important discussion, to also share some of the experiences and the perspective from the Caribbean. Indeed, and I think what Daniel has also spoke about, it's a lot of what many of the employers organizations in the Caribbean region has been doing, and has been, repositioning themselves and their services in order to respond effectively to their members during this very difficult time. In terms of the role of the employers organization in building resilience, I mean, that's the critical part or the core of part of what the employers organization are doing and have been doing. Of course, they are the voice of the employers at the national level, and therefore through their different representative capacity and engagement, they've been able to also influence, like what Daniel has said, some of the measures that we saw coming out of the various governments. A lot of employers organizations have been part of social dialogue discussions at the national level, and what have been also very useful and to support their participation, particularly in those tripartite discussions, has been their ability to also collect very important data from their membership in order to understand what has been the impact of COVID-19 on their businesses, on their financial liquidity, on their operations, on supply chain. And they've been able to use that information to really make evidence-based recommendations. And we've seen particularly employers from Barbados, Employers Confederation, Trinidad and Tobago Employers Consultative Association that have really gathered this important data to contribute towards those discussions at the national level. Resilience is very important, and I'm also very happy to say the Caribbean, 4 years, a little over 4 years been there, it's a very resilient. The people, the Caribbean, are very resilient. You would know, the Caribbean has been vulnerable to a lot of natural disasters. I can remember in 1 year, this must have been 2017, where you had Hurricane Emma and Hurricane Maria just very close to one another. So as businesses were recovering from one hurricane, another hurricane then had to happen. But the level of resilience, and this is the capacity of the businesses to really recover after a disaster, has been quite amazing. Of course, with the pandemic, the situation is difficult. You understand the risks for the Caribbean region, particularly because of the tourism-oriented economy. The shutdown measures, the close down of borders have had quite a very devastating impact on the small economies. Of course, there are still some countries like Trinidad and Tobago where the borders are still closed, but there are some countries, Barbados, St. Lucia, Jamaica, Bahamas, where the borders have been open. And these are the countries that also very, rely a lot on tourism. So it has been a struggle to balance, of course, making sure that you address the health aspect of the pandemic, but also making sure that the economy is able to the jobs are sustained, businesses is able to be sustained, livelihoods are sustained, and so forth. So it has been quite a challenge.
Great, thank you, Vanessa. When you were both speaking, I was wondering, so one thing is, of course, to be prepared, and perhaps you have the resilience ingrained in your DNA because you live in a very hazard-prone area, as you just said. But we always say crisis is an opportunity. So in either, this is a question to both of you, could you give us an example of an enterprise, an entrepreneur who was able to reinvent their business model as a consequence of the crisis, of the corona crisis? So saying, I diversified my business activities in such a way, and I'm now actually better off, or at least not as bad off as I had imagined.
Maybe just to go quickly there, maybe not so much from the entrepreneur perspective, but I would like to share with you what I've also seen even from the employers' organization themselves, having to reposition their services in order to respond effectively to the crisis. A lot of the employers' organization in the region have to some extent tried to do that. Of course, understanding that a lot of them are small, so the capacity to do a lot of things is really constrained. I want to share example, particularly from, let's say, from the Barbados Employers Confederation, where immediately during the pandemic, you started seeing the organization designing and developing targeted services for the different membership of the organization. Of course, the very small membership had a lot of demand in terms of advice, in terms of services. Remember also some of the legislative arrangements or the labor laws in some of the countries were very silent in terms of how do you deal with a situation such as this pandemic in terms of leave, in terms of layoff. So, you found the employers' organization really trying to position their services in order to assist many of the small companies who did not have internal capacity to deal with this. I've also seen the Belize Chamber of Commerce and Industry also being very vocal during this pandemic, where they were present, they were loud, they collected information from members to understand what were the issues, and they were on TV, they were on radio interviews, so they were out there saying to government, this is the situation and this is what is required from the employers. The Bahamas also, started talking about we need to look at the labor legislation, the employment legislation, and address the silent part that we are now seeing as a result of the pandemic, so that we are able to serve the private sector or the employers better.
Great. So it's not just the entrepreneurial creativity, it's also the creativity of the EBMOs themselves. Thank you, Vanessa. Daniel, anecdote or example that you would like to share? And you are on mute.
Can you hear me now? Yes. First, I'd like to agree with Vanessa on the impact of data-driven policy advocacy. It's an example that we've seen work tremendously in our favor, because during this period, we did a lot of analysis based on our members' experiences. And this was the basis of our interventions with government, which then resulted in many of them getting passed, because we were presenting what was on the ground. Now, one of the examples I would like to share is around our beverage, especially alcoholic beverage sectors within Uganda. Over the past, since March, 6 months that is, we've had a lockdown on any public gatherings that have more than 30 people. As such, this is really the natural market for alcoholic beverages. Bars are under lockdown, gatherings are under lockdown. So one would have expected that over this period, a lot of them would have folded, because they were then unable to sell on a regular basis. However, we were quite impressed when we sat down with them, and they informed us that they were looking to pivot from providing alcoholic beverages to production of alcohol-based hand sanitizer. At the beginning of this period, we had probably one supply of alcohol-based hand sanitizer. Right now, we probably have about 60 companies that are involved in that process. And it has been a tremendous game changer for them, because while they are unable to serve their natural market, they are supplying a necessity in this period of health emergency. They are also managing to export their products beyond the country. So that's one of those where there was quite a lot of movement.
Excellent, thank you. That was an inspiring anecdote you shared there. Thank you. Good, okay. I see already a few questions popping up in the chat from our audience, and that's great, because the very next thing we wanted to do is indeed move into the questions and answer session with you. And please continue using the chat box to ask your questions. Jana is going to give us a friendly hand, and she's going to identify a few questions that we can pick up. And Gary, sorry, I'm calling you out a bit cold right now, but if you want to come back online as well, that'd be fantastic. So you can join the speakers again. And then we just pass the floor to the audience and take your questions. And I think a few are already there. Can you kick us off, and we continue the discussion? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So maybe also for our listeners, if you want to post your questions, there's a specific box basically saying questions. So please type in your questions there and we will pick them up. And I already have a question from Stefanie, who asked, could you please provide a practical example of advantages and drawbacks for a BCM for an SME? So is there any, I mean, I think we've looked now at the advantages, that they could even, be more flexible, find new opportunities for their business. But are there any drawbacks? Is there business continuity management in any case making their lives more difficult? And there was no specific person being addressed here, so whoever wants to take it up, please go ahead.
Can I jump in on this one?
Sure, Gary, go ahead.
Yeah, look, I think one of the big issues for small firms is that usually, particularly owner-manager firms, they've got just so much on their plate. There's so many different elements of running a business, which is hard at the best of times. And coming along to suggest that they should do something, invest in something, both in time and perhaps even money, is for a potential hazard to come along and impact on this, can take a little bit of selling. So I think one of the key elements with BCM in terms of programmatic approach is to try and incentivize it as much as possible, and where programs can be put in place that incentivize BCM take up, that I think has shown to be a big driver for companies to do that. So what would an incentivization look like? It would look like something like credible proof that a company has gone through a process, a training process, to develop a plan for their business that is in some way verifiable. And then you can have potential conversations with the likes of financial services, banks, insurance companies, even in terms of access to other markets, or for suppliers. If you're a very large company that has a lot of suppliers, this could be something that could be developed in terms of incentivizing the process. So I think that's a key thing. Just to remember, the small firms have just so many limitations, and throwing one more thing on the to-do list is often very difficult. And as I said at the opening remarks, BCM is insurance, and it's only really the far-sighted companies will take that up, or have the time, energy, and space to do it. So if we can incentivize the process, I think that's a key thing.
Thanks, Gary. And maybe picking up on that and linking it to the next question, and maybe Daniel, I would ask you to answer this. There's another question, or actually two of them, asking about a financial scheme for SMEs to apply BCM, and also again mentioning that the micro enterprises, and I think you mentioned that, were not so well prepared, and they might not be able to financially, come up with the financial means to actually prepare themselves well enough. Were there any strategies that you had now in mind to maybe support them in the future more to have these business continuity management activities in place, and how would they then be able to finance these?
Okay, thank you. Certainly, there's a key need for us to provide services that enable business continuity to come on board more into our operations. We have engaged with a number of our partners, and currently we're actually carrying out quite a raft of trainings aimed at enabling our members be ready for the next pandemic, for the next event that is likely to affect their businesses. The beauty is that the silver lining, not the beauty really, the silver lining is that right now, with the hindsight of seeing what COVID-19 has done, there's a lot of reception for initiatives that aim to train on business continuity. As an institution, we are also working on setting up a unit within our membership team that is able to take members through the process of developing a business continuity plan, go to their premises, understand their unique challenges, and develop these plans for them, so that eventually they are then able to do this over and over again as the years go by. Of course, we do also understand the challenge that comes with access to finance. Fortunately, we've had a special fund that has been set up to facilitate manufacturing. At the moment, it's really looking at wider cash flow issues other than business continuity, but we are in the process of lobbying so that even the aspect of business continuity planning is incorporated into the financing, so that members can access this fund and develop this capacity in-house.
Great, super interesting. Vanessa, do you want to share maybe a example from the Caribbean, or else I would jump to the next question, but I want to give you the floor first.
No problem, I can do that, and this is wonderful because I have, like I said, my colleagues from the Caribbean who are also joined online, and I see here a colleague from Trinidad also sharing that, from the previous questions relating to entrepreneurship, that even in the Caribbean, you've also seen companies such as Angostura, which is, one of the large rum producing companies in the Caribbean, also moving into manufacturing hand sanitizers. As an alcoholic, of course, as an alcoholic beverage producer, but also there's another one big local cosmetic company, Sasha, in Trinidad, and I also believe they have, presence in other parts of the Caribbean, also, moving to also manufacture some hand sanitizers. So there's been quite a lot of innovation and creativity from a lot of businesses trying to really identify that opportunity out of this crisis to really diversify, even, you know, enter into spaces where they did not necessarily operate. But I also want to also identify, again, in addition to those kind of innovative and entrepreneurial culture that is emerging very strong, is also, you know, the role that digitization also can serve in terms of facilitating some of this. And I know that in the region, this is something that we are also exploring. You know, how do we then begin to really take advantage of some of the digital platforms that we have to facilitate the provision of a number of services. Thanks.
Yes. Yes, thank you. That is very interesting, and I think brings another opportunity into our head that we can use now in these days. I have another question, maybe if we still have that time, I think, to look at the next question, which is about women entrepreneurs and whether they might have been more severely hit by the crisis now than other entrepreneurs, and how we can consider this when we are applying BCM measures, or if we are training on enterprises in these or supporting them in any case. And what is your experience? Were they more hit than others? Well, how did you maybe also see support measures in that way? Anybody of you who wants to jump first?
Maybe I can jump in, Jana. I think there's been quite a number of studies already this year that not just in terms of you know, female-owned businesses, but women in general have come out of this crisis have been much harder hit for a whole range of reasons and across you know, a whole range of different kind of sectors. But in particular, I think, yeah, female-owned businesses, there's enough studies already to suggest that they are particularly badly hit. And I think, like, in terms of responses, I think I suppose from a development perspective, it's something that we need to be, you know, highly cognizant of and build into the interventions as we go forward to make sure that there's a particular focus and emphasis on supporting and understanding the reasons why female-owned businesses were particularly badly hit. I think there's also, you know, when a crisis like this hits, there's, you know, the way I look at it is you're truckling along on a track, a rail track in 2019, and we're going in this direction. 2020 comes along, and and we're just suddenly moved into a completely different thing, different track, different way, and a different future. And you've heard this narrative around building back better, and I think it is really an opportunity to do that. And I think specifically around female-owned businesses, we should be able to look at the specific reasons why they were badly hit, build into the interventions that we have mechanisms to try and reduce that as much as possible in the future. It's actually a core part of resilience, I think, a new kind of resilience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Gary, because I think one of the things we're noting from our end is some of the underlying factors are that if you look at women-owned businesses in Uganda, they constitute the majority of the smaller to medium enterprises, the much smaller entities. And as such, they are more prone to shocks because the level of preparation may not be as adequate as it should be. As an association, we are taking a strong interest in this particular area. One of the things that we have commissioned is a study into the particular impact on women-owned businesses and what we could do to assist them. We are also doing a lot of virtual engagements with these businesses to provide day-to-day support as they move to build back up. But it's definitely certainly a long way to go. There's quite a lot more we could do, and the pandemic has actually exposed the areas where perhaps we are not doing our best, and we just need to move better going forward.
Thank you. Yeah, super interesting. And interesting to hear what you already have done in that regard now with the pandemic. Yeah, Vanessa, please.
Thanks. Just to also jump in there to say, you know, we as the ILO, we also actually have another big project that we are implementing in partnership with UN Women and funded by the EU in Jamaica. Which looks at, you know, and part of that we had to undertake a very comprehensive study to understand what are some of the challenges and the blockages, difficulties that women entrepreneurs experience in trying to build their business and sustain their businesses. And of course, during the pandemic, you know, you also started seeing the impact that it had on many, especially those businesses that are small, that are run by these women entrepreneurs. But another point also to say, if you look at the field of some of these businesses, you know, it's more around personal care, you know, like spa and hair salons, and because of the restrictions that we've seen as a result of the pandemic, of course, that would have had the most difficult and direct impact on such businesses. But you know, and then one example in Trinidad also, you've seen some of the women trying to come up with creative ways of still surviving, sustaining their businesses so that they can be able to look after their families. So when the lockdown measures began to be relaxed a little bit and you know, restrictions were lifted a little bit, you started seeing some of these women then trying to provide in-house services so that they can still be able to earn a living during this very difficult time of the pandemic. Thanks.
Thank you. We also still have the question here now, is the ILO, or generally do we have maybe capacities to provide training for BCM? And I think we have heard Gary talking about this a bit, but I also heard Daniel that you are starting through your business membership organization to actually train people. Maybe we can have just a quick round also again on how you, and I know it's only 4 minutes left here, but just a quick round on how you see those trainings happening, how you feel like, what is your feedback also to the trainings, and what should be included in these? How should they be also provided?
Maybe just a quick point from we actually in the Caribbean, we've implemented quite a number of dedicated training on business continuity planning. 2018 as part of a broader EU project that we had, but now recently with the pandemic, based on the BCP for COVID-19 tool that the ILO had developed. So we had about 3-hour virtual sessions with majority of the employers' organizations in the region. So there is indeed an opportunity to sort of develop this as a much more comprehensive service that the employers' organization can provide to members, because like Gary said, BCP is no longer a nice to have thing, but it's actually part of a strategic component of any business. So this is an opportunity as the region to develop it and build it as a sustainable service that the employers organization can provide to members and potential members.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ours is more around developing a harmonized BCP checklist that can then be cascaded down to the individual companies, and they can then use to vet their readiness. And then the second element we are focusing on is creating linkages between sector players. If there is a better performing entity within the sector, we're having sessions where we share experiences. We say, okay, how did you go through this? What did you do on your end that enabled you to be better at the end of it all? And we're finding that these lessons are assisting in then informing the smaller members within those sectors to prepare adequately.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Okay, Jana, I think thank you for walking us through the question and answer session and for catching the interesting questions for us. Stefanie, before we move to the very last end, I just wanted to finish off this this part by quickly asking or inviting our speakers to finish off with a very, very short key takeaway. Perhaps looking at the future, and really just in a few words, what do you think is the key priority for SMEs and for business resilience? What do you see as some of the major things coming our way and where you are concentrating your efforts?
Okay, from the key issue, I think you mentioned it in your presentation, that the risks are diverse. It's no longer business as usual where you could tick off the risks and say, okay, fire, I'm insured, injuries on the factory floor, I have that covered, and a couple of others that were obvious. We now have pandemics as part of that mix, and who knows what else. I think one thing that we're pushing for our members is to periodically review their business continuity plans to ensure that any new evidence is taken into consideration, but also to be open in their thinking around what the risks are that they could face. Don't think of only Uganda as a point of concern. Think about what could affect you that could come from anywhere around the world. And we believe that if that's the case, then it's a lot easier to predict and plan for any emergencies that may come up in the future.
Great, thank you. So very much this multi-hazard component in the scale of the risk we're facing as well. Vanessa, over to you.
Thank you, Julian. Indeed, I mean, Daniel is quite spot on, and also to understand also that the pandemic is still here with us. It has not gone yet. We may be in different phases, different levels, and different restrictions, but we still have the pandemic here with us. And I know that especially for many of my colleagues in the Caribbean, who are running small businesses, even employers organizations who have been really hit hard because of, or as a result of the pandemic, where even, collecting membership fees is now becoming a struggle. Now the challenge is to really surviving this pandemic. I think that the main thing is how do we survive this and come out of this this particular pandemic. And of course, issues around sustainability. How do we support businesses to really remain sustainable in a short to medium run? And of course, the longer term will be about restoring an enabling environment for sustainable enterprises. But the immediate thing right now is really to survive.
Thank you, Vanessa. Very good reminder. We're still in the crisis before we jump onto the next one. Very good. Gary, last short key takeaway, and then we close this end.
Yeah, thanks, Julian. I think that Daniel and Vanessa summed it up pretty well. I mean, if I could just have two seconds to do some advertising at the very end. As I mentioned at the opening, GIZ and the ILO, we've had a partnership in this area the last number of years. Currently, and we're in this for the longer term in terms of this resilience agenda that is now very much at the forefront, and particularly in the UN. And we are developing a range of multi-hazard tools and training materials. Is all currently happening. For anybody listening now, and I know we are recording this, and this will actually then go out to colleagues in the Pacific later on today. Very interested in getting this recording later on. Would love to hear from you. Share your experiences with us. If you'd like to get involved in that work, please do get in contact with us, or actually Julian directly. Probably would be the best bet. So just a short advertising break before we finish up.
Very good. Thank you, Gary. And actually, our email addresses are on the last slide, so do reach out to us. Thank you, Stefanie, for your patience, and I think we're done over here.
Thank you. Yeah, I was hoping to actually come in when the question was where to get further support, and then I would have given back to you, because as an ICR facility, also we are providing additional support. Of course, we as a facility, as I mentioned before, we are covering a wide range of topics, so we don't ourselves have the specific tools developed to train business membership organizations on BCM, or also enterprises themselves. However, I would still want to mention really that if you have specific questions for your own organization which popped up in this webinar and you haven't been able to answer, if you have a training need and you think that we could be supporting you in this, please contact us. You will see, you will see our email address on the slide. icrfacility@giz.de is still for now the email address which you can be using to register your interest. Eligible are only organizations, of course, which are based in the ACP. And we will be able to provide support only to a certain amount. Yeah, let's see who would like to be supported, and then we will try to make everything possible, which is possible. And of course, also these one-on-one clinics which we would be providing, which are directly around business continuity management, can be provided on quite a short notice. Julian would be, I think, more than happy to support you on behalf of the ICR facility. And additionally, as I mentioned in the very beginning already, if there is longer-term support needed and you are interested in working with us, then please also send us an email and we can share the forms needed for actually applying to for our longer-term technical assistance. If you want to benefit from a one-on-one clinic, then you really simply have to send us an email, mention your organization and the rough questions you have, and then we will try to make everything possible. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for everyone joining us today, and that's it from my side.
And maybe just a reminder to please stay for a bit more to also have the satisfactory question in the end. But before that, Julian, you can close.
Right. No, thank you, Jana. That's it. Thank you for joining us today. If you want to find out more about BCM, we've got the main links here. ILO training tool, also the Uganda Manufacturers Association, if you want to learn more about the work that Daniel does, the ILO Bureau for Employees activities, and our email address is here, so feel free to reach out to us. Quick thank you to Stefanie for having me, for the ICR facility, for organizing this. Stefanie and Soko have been in the back organizing this and making sure everything works smoothly. Our speakers, of course, Vanessa, Daniel, Gary for being with us, and Jana for the preparations and for doing the tandem and passing the ball with me during the webinar. Thank you and goodbye, everyone.